Yeah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alyssa Karpinka, and I'm the events coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. Tonight's event is coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. Special hello to anyone joining us through the live stream from home. And for those of you who are here in person, thank you for joining us as well. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of Opimotewina, wina, kapagamawat, Witigowa, or Journeys of the One to Strike the Wetigo by Ken Carriere. Thank you to Ken for being here tonight. I'd also like to thank University of Regina Press and especially Melissa Shirley for working with us to create the event. We are also joined by editor David McLennan tonight, who will introduce Ken in just a few moments. David is with the editorial team at University of Regina Press and has 22 years of experience in publishing. He has worked on several Canadian bestsellers, including Clearing the Plains and The Education of Opimotewina, and is himself an award-winning author. He was honored to work with Ken Carriere on his book, Journeys of the One to Strike the Wetigo. We will now hear from David. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Alyssa. And thank you to everyone here at McNally Robinson for hosting this event. And just have to say, this is Saskatchewan's greatest bookstore for sure. I want to thank everyone for coming out this evening. It's really gratifying to see all of Ken's family and friends come out to support Ken, your honor. And I'd also like to thank Ken himself, a man whom I got to know somewhat over a year or so ago, for bringing his book of memories, his travel memoirs, and introduced to University of Regina Press, which we must acknowledge is located on Treaty 4 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota nations, and the homelands of the Métis people. University of Regina Press is extremely proud to have been Ken's publisher. Ken and I were introduced in September of 2021, just a couple of months over a year ago. And I had the tremendous privilege of having Ken's manuscript land on my desk. When I first read it, I knew he had something very important. It was so impressive, so unique, and so valuable. There was a deep, intuitive, and sensitive wisdom revealed in every paragraph. I knew, as Ken must have known himself, that he had produced an invaluable resource for those engaged in or interested in land-based activities, land-based education, something this time when our species was grappling with increasing levels of resource extraction, exponential consumerism, as we've just surpassed 8 billion people on the planet, and the tangible and very real impacts of climate change could not be any more important or timely. While Ken's gift of recollections speak to global realities, particularly those of Indigenous people on the planet, whether in the Amazon basin, the Australian outback, or the Tibetan plateau, there are lessons of critical importance in his writing for all people. Ken does speak specifically about the Saskatchewan River Delta, the largest inland delta in North America, and one of the most biologically diverse ecosystems on the planet, where Indigenous people have lived for at least 7,000 years. But again, his stories have universal resonance. He speaks to the value of traditional knowledge and what we all can learn from it, and offers engaging accounts of living on and with the land, our earth, in the past, and to a very important degree, in the present. Ken also provides a wonderful gift of lessons in his language, Swampy Cree. This will be a wonderful resource for those who want to study the language for many, many years to come. It's a major contribution towards continuing use and study. But in addition to that I just spoke of, there was another entire motive to Ken's dogged determination to complete what was a years-long labor. And that was to honor his ancestors, particularly his grandparents. and his mother and his father, and his siblings and his aunts and uncles, and his entire and extended family, both those still with us and those departed some recently. Ken, you do honor them, and you honor them very well. Ken, you and I know it was a bit of a journey to bring us here tonight together, but we, and particularly you, sir, you, through trial and tribulation, you did it. You did it. You're here. And you did it for the well-being of your fellow humans, for the flora and fauna of the earth, for the waterways, the stones, the sacred stone on the grassberry, and most importantly, for those yet to come. For as you say in the dedication to your book, may we leave a healthy place for the unborn who are scheduled to arrive. I have a lot of years in publishing, Ken, but there hasn't been a time when I've ever felt more proud to have worked on a book with an author and to stand in the same room with him on the day that it's released to the world. And I sincerely mean that from the bottom of my heart. On behalf of myself and University of Regina Press, I want to thank you ever so much for this journey. Everyone, I have the pleasure of introducing an extraordinary and in yet in ways an ordinary man, a retired educator, geologist, trapper, commercial fisher, and guide, a fluent speaker of the Swampy Cree language, a member of the Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation, and now author, Ken Carriere.
Thank you, David. Nice introduction. Want to say the last time him and listen to an author speaking here was on a talk about the moose. So that's what this book is about, moose. The other one was about Indians. And that goes back to author that was writing in the 1800s. So this book has been a long time coming, from the 1800s, basically. And the author was Henry David Thoreau. I don't know how many of you have read some of his material. It's still quite widely read. But on top of that, the environmentalists that are looking for material that kind of rocks their world, as you would say, and it gives them a jolt. They read about it. And the other things, there are kind of pop stars that came along. One of them is Don Henley, and he decided that he was going to put a lot of his money into the area where Henry David Thoreau spent time. That's at Walden Pond, at the place called Concord, Massachusetts, just out of that area. And so that's what I want to say right off. And the other thing I want to say, I'll introduce myself here because I just realized that, yeah, I better introduce myself. Even though David really did a fine job. Okay. Not good enough. This will be a green look. Okay, wina, for those who wondering what that means. My given names. Kenneth Gregory Patrick Carriere. These are my given names. Isnila son. Name that I go by is Ken Carriere, or some people call me Kenny Carriere. So, two names. I was born and raised in this state of Witigowa, Scott. That's Spruce Island. Some people call it Spruce or Pine Island. And the settlement that I grew up was called Cumberland House. And I was there from 1951 to 1968. So I spent most of my youth there. What my parents were Pierre Carriere and Agnes Suminis Mackenzie. And I had 7 siblings. We just lost one this year. I left home for education reasons and got my high school diploma in 1970 at Nippon. And graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in geology in 1974 at Sir George Williams University. They renamed that university Concordia University. And it's in downtown Montreal. So I spent a bit of time down in downtown Montreal. I earned a Bachelor of Education degree in 1984 from the University of Saskatchewan, and it was affiliated with the NORTEP program, or Northern Teacher Education Program in Air Ronge. And we have people here who started that. Keith and Linda, they're the 2 people that built that board. And then other staff, Laura, stuff. Yep, we're not, she worked over there too for a while. And of course, we never forget. I almost forgot. Never forget that Penny, my sister-in-law, she worked over there for many years too. So that's where I got my education degree. Went to market. And there were quite a few things to say about Nortep, but I'm going to don't leave it and just go right into what I have to say about this book. So here's what happened here. When I started looking at this, what Thoreau had to say about this whole area that I grew up in. So I want to tell you what I think. It's written a narrative close to Homer's Odyssey and Greek mythology. You start talking about Greek mythology, everybody kind of wants to learn about literature. You have to read some Greek mythology because it jumps out at you. And so anyway, it's basically a Swampy Cree story written as a memoir, because those are you go back to that. When you're writing a memoir, there's this little sea pony, I call it. That's your, they call it, there's a technical name for it. But anyway, there is something in your brain that stores memory. Maybe somebody knows the technical name. But I call it the sea pony being the, I guess the horse that's in the, kind of an animal that's in the ocean, in the water. So anyway, now I described the experience that I had as a young Cree boy, and then youth, and then a young adult. I had that while helping my father work the land, as they would say. At the time, his father was with commercial fishing, saleable fish species, fur bearers for a fish market, and running an outfitting camp for paying customers. And that effects of growing up in an isolated community and attending a school system run by a Christian order of Catholic Church nuns and priests. Now, there's one thing I have to marvel at was my mother's ability to run a household without electricity, indoor plumbing, and refrigeration. She managed to take care of our health. She took full advantage of the healthy environment gifted to us by our natural surroundings. When we were living well to keep, she was living well to keep herself and us physically strong and mindfully active, surviving well with nature as our initial and final backup. I'm going to call it a backup, because now it's just that. This is a story of a severely wounded World War II veteran who comes home to the livelihood he had. He had enlisted with the Canadian Armed Forces to fight in a war. And, my son said it's not the war to end all the wars, but that's the First World War. If you know your history of wars, it's the Second World War. So it actually was the Second World War. I got a little confused there about which war was going to end all the wars. There's so many of them now. They have been living off the land by trapping, hunting, and fishing. Later on, he added outfitting of American hunters in his business ventures. Did this with the help of his sons, relatives, and friends during the 50s to the 70s in northern Saskatchewan. So that's the water.
Just like behind you there. Yeah.
Okay. Here's how it works here. What inspired me to write this book, besides my father's life story? I was intrigued by another story. And this was about Napoleon Snowbird Martin, a Cree trapper, fisher, and moose hunter. The writer, Tom Alderman, entitled it "A Cold, Hard Way to Make a Measly Dollar." Okay, this story is now available with the Migiso Cree First Nation website in Fort Chippewa. So if you want to look that up, that's where you go. Snowbird was a renowned moose hunter, boat and cabin builder, and a dog team traveler. He lived off the land in the Athabasca River Delta, downstream from Fort McMurray, Alberta. And luckily for me, I did get to meet Snowbird. So now, before meeting Snowbird, I read of Henry David Thoreau in the Beaver magazine at the Parks Canada head office in Ottawa. And Thoreau's fascination of the Indians and moose of the boreal woodlands. When I recalled Snowbird's life story and the piece in Athabasca River Delta, his livelihood was parallel with my father's life in the Saskatchewan River Delta. They were both renowned moose hunters, ran dog teams, and as other boreal forest Indigenous people were quite adept at making a living off that land. Now, this was the interesting part about Thoreau. Thoreau had called the forest dwellers sauvage, or something like that. It's a French word. You might have heard savage before, but this is sauvage. And so it is about a forest dweller. My parents were travelers and lived on the lands of the Saskatchewan River Delta and Amish Lake. Just like the ancient Indigenous people did shortly after the continental glaciers made their retreat to the high Arctic. And that's where my, I guess, that's where it really started for me, the idea that there was an author that was way back at over 200 years ago, as I was looking at this, and quite marveled at these people. And so anyway, as I said about, I introduced this Thoreau before, but here's how it started. I was curious of his interest in the fur trader named Alexander Henry the Elder. The Elder's travels into the Saskatchewan River Delta and north into Amish Lake and the Churchill River in Mississippi country. To him, the journals of the Alexander Henry described journeys like Homer's Greek stories of the Odyssey. And Henry the Elder's journals began from his home in Boston, Massachusetts. So he actually came a long ways, actually. And he was traveling by canoe and dog team. So. And so anyway, For Thoreau, he would never take such long treks from his Concord, Massachusetts home. He visited the wilderness closer to his place. He hired Indian guides from the Penobscot Indian tribe in Maine, United States, to take him on trips by canoe and paddle. He took one trip with a moose hunter to witness the kill and dressing of the meat. And after seeing that, I guess he wasn't too impressed, because there's a guy who was a transcendentalist, and he was probably a vegetarian. I have to say that. Anyway, I wish to write this memoir to honor this planet that many Indigenous people call Mother Earth. I describe in this memoir what it was like when the land of the Saskatchewan River Delta was rich. It was so rich that the first inch of topsoil could support the lives of an animal as small as a mouse and as big as a moose. That's what, I'm quoting my brother John's, that's what he told me. Then in the Athabasca Peace River Delta, a Cree elder described their land as Wiyutan Tuskino. Our land is rich. That's all he said. Now, this was a response to researchers who were investigating what would be lost if the Fort McMurray tar sands oil extraction reached the Delta's upland. There's no need to look any further for what an expanding oil extraction from the tar sands will do to the water regime of that delta. The collected data and evidence has been exposed. Expansion of the petrol boom upstream could bust their delta. Some serious I would say. So in part one, the memoirs about me, and this is where I get into my book, it's about me as a boy, youth, and young adult, highlighting my own Delta land use experiences. I described trips I did with my dad to trap muskrats, hunt waterfowl, commercial fish for sturgeon, goldeye, whitefish, pickerel, sauger, and northern pike. Variety of fish there. I described my medevac trip to and from the Palm, Manitoba, and I contrast that with a trip that my dad took as a wounded warrior coming home to Cumberland House. When he came home from the Paw. My dad rode home in a single horse-drawn sled in the dead of winter. His brother Jonas Carriere, a World War I veteran, the war to end all wars, came to pick him up at the Paw. And then goes on further to say he was severely wounded and by an enemy rifle shot that bullet broke his jaw on his right side, destroyed his hearing there, and made his right eyesight weak. He was still bleeding from his wound when he came home. He had sustained shrapnel wounds to his back, and upon recovery, he rejoined the battle. Another thing I learned. These are all things I learned later on. Aside from the physical wounds was PTSD, everybody's heard about it. But that's enough to destroy even the strongest personality, as far as I know. I gave my father a ride to a veterans hospital in Regina, Saskatchewan, to have his slumping jaw repaired. I also visited my parents in Cumberland House at a time to view a solar eclipse. Another visit was with my brother Clifford and cousin Ordine Goulet to see my dad at the Nipmuc Hospital in Benton, in Saskatchewan. These are all Saskatchewan places. Now, in spite of my dad's health issues, he managed to make a living off the land. Like I said, I think I've said this before. Now, you want to know how he did it? He traveled by canoe and paddle, then by freighter canoe with an outboard motor, And then in the winter with a dog team. Now, if you've ever tried to get a dog team to work with you, it's not easy. Then if I have two dogs, one is a lab cross and the other one is a wolfhound mixed with a bloodhound. Once in a while, I take them out on the lake. My son Case, he has to ski in front of those dogs and they'll follow him. There's no way I'm gonna try and train these dogs. That's what my dad had to do. He had to train those dogs. And sometimes he used 9, I think 7, 9. Then if they were racing in the big races, they used to have big races. When he was racing, he'd have up to 12 dogs. I don't know how they did it. It's just, if you have any experience in running dog teams, you know what that's. Too bad Franklin didn't make it. I would have told you guys one time. Racing dogs. Okay, so my brothers Franklin and John often wondered why he did this livelihood. Such hard work, even a strong, healthy person would struggle with. He never slowed down much and was methodical. That's one thing I noticed about him when I was working. Everything. No fooling around, eh? Just get at it. And then my mother, she ran that household and raised us mostly by herself. Then, of course, she was clear about our and her tasks. That's no fooling around there either. You were a church goer, and her prayers were always there. A lot of people know about her. It's always giving us Jerry and everything. We asked them, he used to say, which means, well, pray for me too, Auntie. And what was her response? You're old enough to pray for her. Oh, boy. Okay, I have to say this about my parents. They were, along with others, they were community builders. Now, that's not easy. Right, Evelyn? You were there. Evelyn, guy and late husband, Ron. I think you lived in Cumberland for what, 10 years? 5.5. But you know how the community was like. Yeah, but they had to build it like that. So everyone did their best to build our community. Then the same with the other communities. Within an owl's spy flight. I really like that. The idea of an owl being around spying on people. And in fact, I was told that one time that's what owls did. And anyway, those communities were Pine Bluff, Sturgeon Landing, Honest Lake, Birch River, and Opaskwayak. I mentioned those communities, Birch River and Opaskwayak. A lot of people went to those communities and actually came from there to come in. So it went. Okay, so now back to the grandmother, Virginie Jordan. When she passed away, leaving my grandfather Dougal Mackenzie with orphans, a very capable young woman named Christiana Kirster, or Custer, some people say, from the Honest Lake Indian Reserve. She became, our grandpa's Dougal Mackenzie's wife. Kind of one of those things that back in the day, they didn't happen. The skills Mom and her siblings learned at Honest Lake stayed with her. She used them when she lived with her husband Pierre in Cumberland. Our living space and our arrangement was comfortable. She made sure we attended school and the church service. That was always there for us. This book gives a tiny historical perspective of the land known as the Saskatchewan River Delta and its drainage basin, when there were no hydroelectric power dams upstream, and I'm not sure about downstream, but they were, I think they were not there yet on the Saskatchewan River. And the Saskatchewan River actually starts just around Nipawin because there's two rivers that converge there and all the way down to Lake Winnipeg, the Saskatchewan. Let's see. Then I go into the part where it's post-construction. There's a post-construction period. My grandfather knew me. This part I really actually witnessed. So I was quite young then. So we're talking about a story that goes back. It really does go back. Like I said, memory. Hey, you have to kind of get your memory. But there's some certain things I remember, and it's you went and set these fish nets in a place called the Big Stone. And there's a big stone here, and then there's a lake over here. Right across there, the Cumberland Lake would start. And he actually set his nets there and caught some really nice looking whitefish. And we went with him to check his nets. That's pretty well towards the end of his life, but you could still do that stuff. Kind of amazing guy. And I would have to say that's when the lake was normal before the changes. And later on, we walked across the bottom of the Big Stone River when they filled the upstream reservoir called Tobin Lake. Then we watched Cumberland Lake shoreline turn into a mud flat. So you can see there's an old mushroom going up to set nets where he's catching lake whitefish. Then it turns around, and then the next thing we know, as soon as the dam stops the water flow to the delta, the lake turns into a mud flat. And that happened like within, I think, about 2 or 3 years. So fast things changed. Okay, so in part 2 of the book, I wrote corroborating interviews in Swampy Cree with English translation. With my Amish great relatives, I took their English language stories. In the Cree interviews, describing of the knowledge and skills of a respected Cree moose hunter are described in detail. The work to catch large sturgeon is described. The elders who practice the Cree spirituality and healing are respectfully noted. The interruption of the industrial war in Europe to reach this part of North America is told by those individuals who are most affected. The book has raised an awareness in me that Indigenous spirituality was practiced in this part of North America. I may have wanted to expose more of this aspect of Indigenous life. I am a knowledge seeker, and I have more questions. There are writers who can provide more insight to questions on Indigenous spirituality. The one thing I remember is the advice of my mother. And she said this to me: when you find your own spiritual path, follow it with strong belief. It will guide you. That was her advice. Okay, so at this point, I'm kind of leaving home, and I wanted to sort of highlight some stuff. When my parents asked me when I completed my high school education, what are you going to try for your post-secondary education? I told them I wanted to be a writer, maybe a journalist. One thing I wanted to do. So they bought me a typewriter to get started. Just like that. Okay. You got it, boy. Get going here. I still have the old typewriter as a reminder that I wanted to be a writer. Keep it with me. My parents, aunts, and uncles were all great storytellers. They told their stories in Swampy Cree. I am a writer in the Swampy Cree language. This book is literature for the Swampy Cree language and culture. Now, when I wrote this part, I thought about Audrey Dreamer. And she had made this collage of words and paintings. I think it was like that. A collage with painting. And you were living with regret, right? About not learning. Your parents both spoke Cree, but for some reason. Yeah. That's where that part comes in. I was lucky. And I was able to keep my language. So people that helped me along, Jerry, Keith. Why not so much, eh?
Lots. Still need to replay more.
Okay. Well, so it's OC for sure. And Russell over here. Sister Donna, Les over here. Still pretty well bilingual. And Laura, can't forget Laura. Two people with bilingual here. Anyway. Now, what is my interest in Canadian literature? And of course, I'm interested in Canadian literature and visiting community libraries. And the visiting library we had came from a guy named Jim Brady. I don't know how many of you have heard of Jim Brady. He had the visiting library. And this was Canadian literature. Then there was the family members of John Dorian Sr. with his daughter Cecilia and Marie Dorian. And these people, they spoke important truth to their children. And that's really stuck with me. The family members that I knew of, Pierre, Elsie, Isabel, Louis, Doris, John, Robert, Eric, Ruth, and Anne. They showed me a foundation for proper social interaction when they were our neighbors. We often feel there and used to go there quite a bit. Visit. Then they provided me the reading material for my imagination and encouraged me to get educated in the Canadian school system. I guess they, at that point, wanted to be taught by those nuns. It was getting too difficult to get really good educated, but eventually the Canadian school system did come to break. That's where that's how we ended up, some of us in good positions in government and working in universities. That's how we lucked out. I don't know what would have happened if we had been taught by nuns for quite a while. Some of those nuns couldn't even could hardly speak any English because they were from a French community. Not to say there's anything wrong with them. That, but there is. You want to expand your education, you gotta, if it's in English, you gotta speak that English. If it's in any other language, you have to learn English. That's what we do. Now, there are contributors here who provided histories, family and community photos, and collaborating interviews in Swampy Cree in English. Then there's a knowledge from my late dad and my late mother. And these are stories for my memoir. Definitely it was theirs. The truth is verified from the following persons: my dad, my aunts, dad's sisters, Marie Louise Mackenzie and Elise Saiz. And my mom's sisters, Catherine, Kate Duganat, Josephine Carriere, and Ethel Narvis. My uncles, dad's brothers, Alphonse, William, James, and Roger. And mom's brothers, Steamboat Bill. One of the best storytellers that I ever came across, Steamboat Bill. Could hold an audience for hours. Not just minutes, but hours. Yeah, I'd be walking by his house, maybe in the morning, going somewhere else, come back. There'd be people sitting outside his house and he would stay telling stories. Then there's my mom's brothers were John, lived in Paul, Roderick, he lived in Winnipeg, Langus, he lived in the Narrow Beach. Then there's my brothers, Franklin Cotter, John Victor, Clifford Martin, Les Doble, that's his second name, right? Les. And my sisters, the late Ann Ackle, Vernon Wint, she lives in Ottawa, and Dawn is here. Then my cousins, these are people I went to visit. Beverly Carriere, I visited her in Cranberry, and she gave me her dad's pictures. Told me stories about him, and in fact, she actually saved a CD for me to pick up later on. And it was about my Uncle Roger Carriere. And Uncle Roger was a well-known kind of, my sister called him an icon for the Indigenous community. And in that CD that she's saving for me is my uncle with Sesame Street television show. And I guess think it has something to do with Buffy St. Marie who actually recommended him. So he got that part. And let's see. Then Duganak, he's been fishing on Amisk Lake, at Amisk Lake and Mary's Lake, but mostly at Amisk Lake during the spring fishing, March. They don't do the summer fishing anymore. There's too many tourists there. Run around and drive over the nets and stuff like that. So they said, no more, it's enough. And then there's someone here too, Virginia Janet Forrest. Now, people probably wouldn't, the ones from Cumberland probably wouldn't, who is that? Well, happens that she was raised by her grandparents. Her grandparents were Jill Warren and Virginia Warren. This Chinese, we called her. And Janet Forrest, he goes by Janet, but she has a Virginia Janet. It's named after her grandmother. And her dad was the Elvis Presley impersonator from Beverly Hills. His name was Bucky. Bucky Warren, yeah. And in fact, she showed me a few of her licks on her guitar. So I played a rhythm guitar really good. So, yeah, so pick that up. Then Ordine Goulet, he came and took a picture of my dad. When he was in the hospital, that's probably the last picture of him alive. That was just so crazy. Then Philip Fosnoff, we helped me drive my dad to Regina, to the veteran hospital. And I think Jerry, we stayed on here and placed that. Again, so awful people they were, right? But anyway, thank you for that. I'm gonna stay with you. But that's why we went there. Took veterans hospital. And yeah, these are. Then, of course, Margaret Schweitzer. People from Harmony probably don't know very much. But she was a Duganak, Glenn's sister. And she grew up in Amherst-Lake. And she's part of that family of the Adobenax loss. Fished on Amherst-Lake. I was there. And she had something to say, like a lot of little stories. And one of the part that I remember the most was that she brought out this this basket, this birch bark basket, and told me it was over 70 years old or something like that. And she said that's a basket is a crayon for her visitors, young visitors. Crayons and they draw and stuff, enjoying an activity. Yeah, so that was she's in the book there, part 2. That she contributed to that. Then I found that of course I wrote a homage. If you write an homage, you gotta find some maybe an old photo of somebody that you write on. And I wrote about Lena Stewart. In Cumberland, Lena Stewart actually lived in most of her life Pine Bluff, but she moved to Cumberland on a reserve. But she was a midwife, and she was also a healer. And for me, I was told that when I was getting like to get colds in the winter, at one time she came around and she had collected. There's a Cree name for this, and I don't even want to try saying it, but I could say it as skunk oil. Took it from the scent valuable skunk. And with that skunk oil, she was able to make kind of a hot, made her cold fusion, stirred it up. And I guess I had a drink from it once in a while. And that took away a lot of that germ. I don't know if anybody else here had any experience with skunk oil. I did when I was young, and I can't remember that. I was quite young. The other person here, okay, her granddaughter, Jennifer McGilvery. If you want to know anything about Lena Stewart, the family person that I contact is Jennifer McGilvery, who actually works at the Cumberland House band office. That's where she works. Then there's Elaine Crate, librarian extraordinaire. That's what I call her. A Ministic Community School in Cumberland House. It's no longer called Charlotte School. It's called Ministic. For those who want to know what Ministic means, it just means island. Cumberland is an island. Cumberland House. So that's what it's called. I didn't know that. It must have just changed the name. So what happened to Charlotte? Who is this Charlotte? That his name on the school is named after him out of be changed. That was the big question. I don't want to talk about that too much, but maybe you want to ask me later. I might try to explain it. Now, this Elaine Craig, she provided me the photo keeper's contacts. So she's another one. You were to walk into the school, I guess now, like the walls, they're just covered hallways. The hallways are just covered with photographs. And then if you're, those of you who grew up in Cumberland, you want to know you don't have any photographs there, that's where you go. For yourself, see if you're there. But anyway, the thing that I really enjoyed was she gave me she gave me the photo of Philip Mackay and my sister Manako when they were young. I was really happy to see that photo. My dad's friend, the late Ron Mackay, was a conservation officer for the Saskatchewan government. I think in the late 50s and early 60s. Is that when you were there for 5.5 years? And he was stationed in Cumberland House. And I think your dad was. So anyway, his photos now are archived in the Opimotewina library system in Air Ronge. So if anybody interested in that, the archivist Graham Guest gracefully provided me with these photos. And then there was another person who took photos, Don Nielsen. He was a civil servant for the government of Saskatchewan, and he also took photos of the land around Cumberland. And that's where I spend my summers hunting and fishing with my dad and relatives. Then, of course, I have to kind of thank the Saskatchewan Arts Board here for he provided me a grant for my corroborating interviews and to collect those family photos. That's a possibility there for somebody who wants to do historical research. You can always get it, of course, funding. Now, so what I'm saying about this book, should this book become a learning textbook, may be valid for land-based education and reading for high school students living in Canada's boreal forest regions, universities that study land and water use may have an interest, Native Studies departments may apply as a literature study of Indigenous stories, maybe college level courses on best practices for the conservation of our noble resource, natural resources. Then, of course, I may be wishing way too much for this book, but I'm hoping it does get some attention. Now I'll take this time now to maybe highlight some parts of the book if we have time. How much time do we have here?
We have maybe 10 minutes.
10 more minutes? Oh, okay. So what I'll try to do is look at some of these chapters in the book. The first chapter well, the other thing I've done over the years is I've collected poetry. I've been writing poetry since I was in high school. I had my first published poem in one of the yearbooks when I was in a place called PACI. That's where I went to high school. That's the Prince Albert Correctional Institute. Almost. So anyway, I'll go to that. I'm going to read a poem called Witigo Raising Hell and High Water. I think that's from the Witigos and War. Big introduction. I just did the introduction of this. So now we get to Witigos and War. And War. And there it is. Witigo, raising hell and high water. Witigo has found the fossilized remains of the ancient earth in buried basins at the heart of Turtle Island. Witigo will bring that buried fossil fuel to surface. This will make money to feed hungry machines. Witigo can hardly buy time before digging. Once dug up, that fossil fuel will be in its hands. Witigo is sucking blood at the heart of Turtle Island. Soon it will reach the arteries of Mother Earth, making them steam, gurgle, bulge, and sputter, fed by pressurized water pumping down to it. Mobile melted rock can move anywhere. Following loosened arteries, molten rock creeps up. Once it finds a passageway to the surface, It'll drive the lava smashing through the upper crust. It may arrive at the surface like a ginormous solar flare. Witigo knows the inner workings of a magnet chamber. Endangering all the living creatures on Earth, erupting volcanoes change everything right now. Witigo is sucking blood like the head of Turtle Island. There are massive ice sheets on top of Arctic oil fields. Everything is full steam ahead to bring up the fossil fuel. Open ice flow lanes have ships carrying crude to market. This will advance the melting of a continental ice sheet. Witigo saw coastal flooding and said, too freaking bad. Witigo tastes the future. All we can tell it what it never had. Its spirit screams, nobody can know when a volcano will blow. Climate catastrophes come and go. So shut the hell up. Witigo will stay this till everything is gone. When you idle so much, worries of Witigo go on. Take care of your health, your husky, your horse. Then with your strength and good heart, move on. With that in 28. Now, I'm excited.
About 5 more minutes.
Maybe a couple more things. It's real good. Well, maybe I'll read something about muskrats at Salt Lake. And I'll just read it. I'll just read the part that I wrote something about here. Muskrats at Salt Lake. When I was a teenager, my dad took me to a place where the local people named Willow Lake and Salt Lake. This was in the Hudson's Bay Company for lease on a large tract of marshland. That also meant the trappers operating there had to sell their muskrat pelts to the Hudson Bay Fur Trading Company. How I remember Willow Lake is by the place name of that portage that connects it to the ancient river highway called Saskatchewan, now known as Saskatchewan. Now, I'm going to joke about this, but I wouldn't leave it out. This famous portage is named Chapasconiga Peak. That's in Cree, Chapasconiga Peak. Now, to my Cree inner ear, this Cree portage name had such a melodic tune to it that I always thought of it as the most exotic place to visit. That's the first thing it did to me when I heard that. Wow, what an exotic place. Gotta go there. Well, of course I went there, but I didn't go there for pleasure. I went there to work. It's a different story. Okay, now in English it is known as Willow Portage and still sounds even Willow Portage still sounds exotic, right? Willow Lake in Cree could be named, and I'm trying to use my Cree knowledge here. Chapasco Wetigo. Chapasco Wetigo. See. Again, that has a melodic, sound melodic to me. Salt Lake and Cree could be Siwitagani Saga, another melody. Don't know. That's what Cree language does to do to people. For these place names, I should consult the Wilfred Buck of Cumberland House, lives in the pond. There's another Wilford buck in Nepal who is from a Saskatchewan Cree Nation. Two Wilford bucks in the same community. Imagine that. And both of them are really knowledgeable Cree culture and Cree language. And so anyway, Wilford, the son, is the son of late Pat Buck, and I think Louisa Buck is still alive, and she lives in Cumberland. I know Ripple, right? And she lives in Ripple. And he traveled in like Wilford, he traveled in the Cumberland Marshal with his parents. He was their only child, as much as I know. He was the only child. His parents were unilingual Cree speakers. So that means they didn't speak any other language, just straight Cree. Wilford's place names, knowledge will have story. Of course they'll have story. Everything does, eh? The Cree place names are melodic and have a tune that vibrates to the sounds of that landscape. This is what I always thought. It is like the song Good Vibrations by the 60s popular music band named the Beach Boys. Okay? And we listen to Beach Boys music played regularly by the Flin Flon CFAR radio station. It was just so much coming at you. However, I will never forget what the late Dr. Ahab Spence, an elder and Cree language teacher for the Saskatchewan Indian Federated College in Regina, said to me when I had the privilege of having lunch with him. He asked me very politely, "Mate, si witagan," and that means ask me to solve it. When my wolfish older brothers you'll tell him about this when he sees it on YouTube. Anyway, when my wolfish older brothers asked me to pass the salt, they poked my ribs. I was a skinny guy then, and pointed to the salt shaker with their lips. When I Google a map of the Willow and Salt Lakes, get this, I found two lakes that have been named McGregor Lakes. Where are those Willow and Salt Lakes? So anyway, my editor, sitting back there, listening to me carefully, David, told me that the lakes were named after two brothers from Regina who were killed in action while fighting World War II. The local names given by Indigenous people were not considered before the naming project replaced the Indigenous language place names. Imagine the story behind the McGregor Lakes compared to the local names for the Indigenous people who lived there for millennia. Guy got shot. That's the end of the story. Now the deltas, trout lines didn't have only have place names that were in the Indigenous language of the area. There was a rich muskrat trapping marshland that was called Morganique, or Morgan's Place, named after the famous pirate Captain Morgan on a rum label. Puncha. Puncha means just kidding. Anyway, if you look at the book, there's a photo of two families who trapped muskrats at Morganique. Okay, they were Rosalie and George McCauley, and the other one was Rosalie's sister Virginia and her husband Joe Moran. And in between Joe Moran and I think it's actually in front of Virginia, the young person standing there, and we've been debating who I think the little guy was. Some of us figure it's Ronge. Yeah. Okay, so that's, I think I might be able to read the caption for that. If I can find it. What's this word? Muskrats of Salt Lake. By the way, it's David over there that wrote down all these different chapter titles. Page 40 again. There you go, page 40. See, he even knows what page it is. So anyway, there's a photo of, when you're looking at this photo here. Two families, spring muskrat trapping in an area known as Morgan's Place. Located upstream from Cumberland House between the old and new channels of the Saskatchewan River. My brother John said it was a habitat where muskrats thrived. The people in the photo from left to right are George, and his nickname was Fisher. Macaulay Sr., Rosalie Macaulay, Virginia. Her nickname was Estini Morin, with grandson Ronnie Morin in front of her, and my great uncle Joe Morin. And just for those that are interested in names, if you ever have a chance to read Thompson Highway's book, Permanent Astonishment, then the name Morin is pronounced Mora. That's how he writes it too. M-O-O-R-A-A. Mora. And in fact, I think it was Albert Flett, my other uncle, great uncle. He used to call Joe Morin Mora. I thought it was interesting. So Mora. So I think I want to quit there because I've run out of time.
We could still do a couple questions if you'd like. If the audience has any questions for Ken, I can run over to you with the microphone. Yes, let me know.
Learn them that well.
Fair enough. All right, well, I will come up there and quickly wrap things up so you can get to visiting your friends and fans. Questions?
The question already.
Oh, you do, I'm sorry. Coming up.
I'm interested in the title, and because I know, growing up in my Cumberland house, there used to be a woman, my mom's friend, and
Witigowa.
yeah, so
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about. What it is.
Oh. There's if you look at see, there's so many different names for this Witigowa, where it comes from. And there's some see if I try to remember some of the places I went to visit to get the names. But originally, when the first explorers came into the Saskatchewan River area, and then they went up north to the Churchill River, they traveled through that old area. And I guess they encountered some people that were tall. I think they were really tall. And then the way they were really scary to distance people. And then they also were troublemakers. But most of the trouble that they caused happened in the winter, in the times when the people were going hungry, I guess, from starving. So they come around pretty well. They call them cannibals, and they did some cannibal stuff. Or they ate human flesh. And that happened with the Ojibwe as well, the Anishinaabe. They talk about theirs as Witigowa. And The one book that I read that I really liked about the definition of a Witigowa. This is just what I read was a man who came from a Peewernuk area, like Peewernuk, is named the coastal community on Hudson Bay. Not in James Bay, but up the coast, going towards Port Churchill, that area there. So you get into the not the subarctic, but the Arctic Ocean. You get into Hudson Bay, you're into the Arctic Ocean. But anyway, that guy, his name is William Bird. And I like this definition of Witigo. He actually said that Witigo is actually a spirit. That spirit is will get sent around. And you could actually travel into or go inside somebody, and that person will be gets that spirit turns into something. That's how he explained it. But it is a spirit, and it could be a male or female. There's a lot of books on this. I just use it because in my connection to it is when it got dark was usually in the summer. I think we were told there's no street lights back in Hungary when I was there. It got really dark, so we were told, hey, better get inside. Come inside the yard. Go inside the house. Witigo will get you if you don't go that way. Witigo was going to grab you. Of course, you start getting worried about it because you already knew what a Witigo is. Especially in my situation, I was visiting a guy named Colin Jackson Cook, and he used to tell us the Witigo stories. And when I went and listened to his Witigo stories, I went with young brothers, Harvey, Wade, and Mervyn and Bill Cook. They're cousins. Right? So I got to go up to the cabin right at the edge of town. Right? Yeah, that's where he had it. But before, the Youngs had the homestead. He was right at the edge of that. And it was kind of nice to go and visit him, but boy, did he ever scare us really good. And then, of course, there's this footpath going home, right? My house was the furthest away. Now, young brothers, they were, Lloyd and Harvey, they like teasing, so. And I was ripping down that, she tripped me up, eh? I don't even remember whether I hit the ground or something like that. Because I was already ahead of them. I had to really run home. And it's amazing that you can't remember those kind of stories. I can't remember any one of them. That's how scary it is. I can't remember soon. I can't be a week to go story. But at least I could say something about it. I'm sure.
Want to get a license.
By the way, one of our cousins, Beverly, her husband, Kevin, that's his second name. Me too.
I heard the word Witigo. Is that similar?
Pretty close, yeah. And if you probably, I don't know if you ever saw this movie called The Lone Ranger.
Yeah.
The star actor in it was Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
He mentioned that. He mentioned the wind. And he goes into this elaborate explanation of what the Indian was. He's working with the Comanches. He's part of the Comanche tribe. And I guess his movie, that Johnny Depp movie was banned. They just struck it right off. I don't know. I had a chance to quickly watch it on, I think it was on YouTube, just partially. And I thought, geez, it's good, it's really good movie, why did they buy it? That's the Americans for them. And whatever they want. You don't like it, too bad.
All right, well, I'm gonna come up and say a quick thank you to you and we can get to your signing. Thank you again for having your book launch with us and thank you to David for being here and everyone at University of Regina Press. Huge thanks to all who attended tonight, either in person or virtually. I believe Ken will stick around and sign some books. And of course, we've got copies available just at the desk right there. Thank you all for joining us and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. That's very good.